She was still alive when they found her. Barely. Her leg twisted unnaturally. Inside a rusted steel trap, fur-soaked. With blood and snow melt. She didn't cry. She didn't move, just stared at the men approaching with thick gloves and bolt cutters, her body frozen in shock. Her pupils wide and unblinking. It was as if she'd already left her body behind, choosing to retreat somewhere. Deeper, quieter, far from pain. It had been at least 2 days. No signs of food. No sign of struggle anymore. One of the rescuers whispered. We almost sedated her just to put her out of her misery. But they didn't. Instead, they cut through the trap, lifted her slowly into a crate, brought her back to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. They named her Savannah. It wasn't because she looked like she belonged to a warm golden land. Not then. She looked like ruin, fur matted with dried blood, breathing. Shallow bones visible beneath the skin. But they gave her that name like a wish. A second chance if she could find it. The first few days, she did nothing but try to escape. She hurled her broken body against the steel walls of her enclosure until her stitches tore open again. The team watched on cameras, afraid to enter. She didn't want food. She didn't want safety. She wanted out, even if it meant breaking every bone left. She didn't growl at people. Growled at the wind, at shadows, at herself. Her eyes were open, but they didn't see. And then she stopped trying. On the 5th day, Savannah lay down in the farthest corner of her pen and didn't move again. She refused water. She refused painkillers. She let flies land on her muzzle. She was breathing, but barely. It wasn't just that she'd been hurt. Something deeper had broken. Something no splint or antiseptic could reach. The team stayed quiet around her. Enclosure, voices low, movements slow. They understood the difference now. This wasn't a bobcat recovering. This was a creature grieving. A creature who had decided that survival might not be worth. They tried everything. Familiar scents, fresh meat, quiet music, but nothing reached her until the day a second crate arrived. A shipment from Texas. Unexpected, urgent. Inside was another feline, smaller, stranger, not from these woods, not from this continent, and Savannah hadn't seen him. He was trembling when they lifted him out. A tiny leopard cub, no older than 12 weeks, his belly patchy with healing burns, eyes dull with exhaustion. He didn't hiss, didn't growl, just made a low, searching cry, a sound that had no shape like a question, with no answer. His name was Kyo. They found it on the shipping papers during a raid outside Austin, Texas. He'd been smuggled across the border in a duffel bag, sold online as an exotic pet. When they found him, he was curled in the back of a closet, hungry and shaking, wrapped in a child's blanket like a forgotten toy. He shouldn't have survived. They tried contacting sanctuaries, zoos, even foreign rescue programs, but none had space or approval to take a non-native big cat, not in his condition. Only the rehab center in Santa Fe had a medical team available. Temporary, they said, just to stabilize him. His enclosure was set up across from Savannah's. Not too close, just enough for distance, for safety. They noticed him before they did. It started with a shift. The surveillance cameras Caught her head turning, nothing more. But it was the first time in days she'd responded to anything. Her ears flicked toward the soft, uncertain sound he made as they placed him on the heated bedding. He cried again that night, a soft, broken noise, raw and small. Savannah stood up. She didn't charge the gate, didn't slam her weight into the wall. She simply stood slow, shaky, deliberate, and faced the direction of his pen. For 5 minutes, she didn't blink. The next morning, she ate. Not much, just a few strips of rabbit meat. But after a week of starvation, it was enough to make the staff rush to the monitors, speechless. Savannah kept her eyes on the enclosure, across from hers, the entire time. Ko couldn't see her. He was too weak to explore, too busy surviving. But she knew he was there. And somehow, in a place that had never meant home for either of them, something had begun. At first, no one believed it. The team reviewed the camera footage 3 times before saying anything. Savannah had been so deeply locked in silence, so utterly unreachable, that some had already begun whispering the quiet possibility no one wanted to say aloud. She's gone. Gone in the way animals sometimes go without dying, folding in on themselves, disappearing behind their own eyes. Not asleep, not sedated, but shut down, closed off from everything that might touch or hurt. But now she was moving, not pacing, not flailing, watching. She kept her gaze fixed on the tiny leopard cub in the enclosure across from hers. No growls, no teeth, just a still, intense stare. The kind that didn't feel like aggression, but wasn't comfort either. She's aware, one volunteer whispered, not taking their eyes off the screen. But I don't know what that means yet. Kyo, for his part, didn't notice her at first. He was too busy surviving. His world was a heat lamp, a bottle, and the warm towel he burrowed into like it might bring his mother back. But 2 days later it changed. Ko stood for the first time and made his way slow, stumbling toward the edge of his enclosure. He sniffed the bars, looked out through the plexiglass divider and stopped. There she was. Savannah didn't move. Kyo sat down in front of the partition and simply stayed. They stared at each other for a long time, neither blinking. Ko tilted his head, reached a paw through the tiny gap near the floor. Not far enough to touch, just enough to try. Savannah's ears pinned back, her tail flicked. A low growl started in her throat. Not full volume, but low, uncertain. The volunteers froze, but she didn't charge, didn't hiss, didn't leave. She held her ground, every muscle tense, her breathing shallow, but steady. She watched the small spotted figure across from her like he was something she didn't recognize. Not prey, not threat, just unfamiliar. Kyo yawned. The motion startled her. Her front paw lifted an inch, tense. Then, slowly she lowered it. The staff gave them strict limits, no shared sessions, no contact, no risks, but they allowed the enclosures to remain side by side, under close monitoring, always with escape panels in place. That night, Savannah didn't sleep in her corner. She slept near the divider. The next morning, she growled again, louder this time when Ko pressed his nose against the seam between them. But there was no lunge, no violence, just that constant, pulsing tension like a wire drawn tight, humming between caution and something neither of them could name. She watched him all day. The cub would nap, stretch, roll, whimper in dreams. And Savannah stayed near. Wasn't comfort. Not yet, but it wasn't. Nothing. And after everything she had lost, her body, her freedom, something deeper and unseen, even that almost meant something. Volunteers stopped using the word hopeless because while no one could say what was happening between the bobcat and the baby leopard, they all knew something was. Kyo was stronger now. Had only been a few days, but the change was unmistakable. He was still small, still underweight, still walked with a wobble that made the vets hold their breath every time he moved. But his eyes had focus now. His steps had purpose. And most of all, he had started playing. Not in the wild, frenzied way of a healthy cub, but in gentle swats and clumsy pounces on his blanket, his tail a plastic ring. Sometimes he'd pause, mid-aim, and glance at the divider like he was checking to see if Savannah was still watching. She always was. She no longer growled. She didn't move much, didn't approach the seam, but her posture had shifted, no longer tense, no longer bracing for attack. She would lay near the divider with her head low, ears forward, breathing slow and even. The staff was careful not to name what they didn't want to jinx it, didn't want to turn it into a story before it became real. But they watched more closely now. Observe the stillness in Savannah's body when Ko was nearby. How her food was gone each morning. The wound on her leg, though still raw, no longer bled from self-inflicted thrashing. Then came the procedure. Ko's burns, though healing, needed close care. New dressings, topical, antibiotics, hydration therapy. The team scheduled a medical session in the exam room just an hour away from his enclosure. It wasn't unusual. He'd been taken out before, though always sedated, always barely conscious. This time, though, he was awake when they awake and alert and loud. As the vet scooped him into a carrier, Ko let out a high, sharp cry. Not pain, not fear. Something else, something that sounded like protest. Savannah jumped to her feet. She rushed to the divider, pacing hard against the edge, nose pressed to the seam, her tail lashed, eyes wide. By the time Ko was out of sight, she had retreated again to the corner, to the shadows. All the progress, the slow shift from collapsed despair to watchful calm, dissolved in a moment. Wouldn't eat that morning, wouldn't move. When staff came near, she turned her face to the wall. They watched her, breathing, sharp, shallow. Her paw twitched, her ears flattened at every hallway sound. It wasn't fear. It was unease. A kind of unsettled waiting, as if some small thread holding her together had gone missing. When Ko returned, drowsy but stable, Savannah didn't approach right away. She kept her distance, watched him carefully as he was placed back on his bedding, his fur smelling of antiseptic and stress. He didn't play that night. He curled up and slept, paws tucked beneath his chin, tail across his nose. Savannah slowly stood, moved forward, lay down, not touching the divider, but close enough for her breath to fog the plexiglass between them. She didn't look at him, but she didn't leave. Whatever had begun between them, it wasn't gone. It had just paused, held its breath, waiting for something neither of them could name yet. The days stretched on, quiet and slow. Ko grew steadier on his feet, stronger in his steps. His fur began to thicken, the bare patches on his belly fading into soft gold. He played more now. Clumsier pounces, curious little growls, light-hearted swats at leaves blown in by the wind. But always, he returned to the divider. That seam between their enclosures had become his anchor. After every meal, every nap, every brave exploration of his little world, he would drift back to that edge, press his body close, and wait. Savannah began to meet him there. First it was simple proximity. She would lie a few feet away, eyes half closed, not acknowledging him, but not retreating either. Over time, the distance closed. Slowly, without drama, without warning. One morning, Kyo padded to the divider and reached through the lowest slat with his paw. Savannah didn't move. Then she leaned in. Not a full step, not a lunge, just a slow, steady tilt of her body, until her nose hovered just above his outstretched paw. She sniffed, sat still, then laid down again, this time, with her side resting against the divider. It was the first time they touched, even through the barrier. The staff noticed immediately. They said nothing, but they stayed longer by the observation window. Kyo, still a baby in so many ways, had started vocalizing. Little chuffs, soft mews, not cries of distress, but the kind of sounds meant to be heard by someone else, a mother, a sibling, anyone. Savannah listened. He didn't reply, not at first, but she remained near. She no longer flinched when he moved suddenly or made noise. She no longer seemed to brace herself for pain. Whatever had shattered in her had started to shift, not disappear. Those kinds of wounds don't vanish, but soften, move. Savannah's eyes changed. They no longer stared through walls. They followed him. When he played, she watched. When he slept, she lay nearby. Her body curved in the same direction, breathing with a rhythm that matched his. The volunteers whispered to each other when they thought no one else was listening. He needs her. He thinks she's his mother. But there was something else, too. Because Kyo wasn't the only one changing. Savannah moved more now. She explored the edges of her enclosure, ate more consistently, accepted brief, cautious treatments from staff. She didn't growl anymore. Not at the wind, not at herself, not at the world. It was as if his presence had become a thread, stitching her back together, one small loop at a time. She wasn't whole, but she was no longer empty. And Kyo, tiny and wounded and alone, had given her something no surgery could, a reason to. The first time Ko fell asleep, pressed against the divider, Savannah didn't move away. She had every chance. She'd been alert when he curled up beside the seam, his body small and folded, back rising and falling in shallow rhythm. He nestled into the base of the plexiglass like it was warm, like it meant something, like he trusted her to be there when he woke. And she stayed. The cameras recorded them. Through the night, one large, one small. Two spotted silhouettes lying in mirrored stillness, inches apart, but separated by barriers no paw could reach through. In the morning, Ko lifted his head, blinked sleepily, and let out a low, rasping noise. It wasn't quite a call, but it reached her. Savannah blinked. Then, slowly, she rose and stretched, arching her back carefully, placing each paw down with intent. Walked the perimeter, glancing over her shoulder just once. Ko followed from his side. Wherever she stepped, he shadowed her, mimicking her movements as if they were a game, only he understood. He was clumsy, too young to move with her silent grace, but he tried. For the first time in weeks, the staff heard someone laugh. "She's teaching him," volunteer murmured, eyes wide. "Or maybe he's reminding her how to live." They began planning short supervised sessions. It was a risk. Savannah was still a wild bobcat, and Ko was a vulnerable, foreign cub with no natural bond to her. But instincts ran deep, and Savannah's instincts had shifted. The first session was brief, 10 minutes. Ko was placed in a shared neutral enclosure with exit points for both. Savannah was released second, her body low, movements cautious. The team held their breath. She didn't pounce, didn't run. She walked directly to him, sniffed the air above his head, and stood over him as he sat motionless, beneath her chest. Then she laid down. He climbed onto her side and rested his chin against her ribs. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. And in that moment, no one could say which of them needed the other more. Because Ko, abandoned, traded, orphaned, had never known safety. Not from anything, not from anyone. He searched for warmth like a child who had memorized the shape of loneliness. And Savannah, battered, broken, caged in pain, had forgotten what it meant to be needed. Her wounds were healing, but her heart had been hollow. Now it beat for something, for someone. Every day the sessions grew longer. They played in short bursts. He chased her tail. She let him. He crawled under her chest. She let him sleep. If anyone approached too fast, she rose in front of him. Not aggressive but solid, present. She had become his shelter, and somehow, in protecting him, she began to find the pieces of herself again. Not prey, not predator, not patient, something more. Something alive. The sky had turned pale with the early light of winter when the first mistake happened. It was quiet that morning. Too quiet. A new arrival had been delivered overnight. Another bobcat, this one younger, unpredictable, and visibly agitated as sedation began to wear off too soon. She was placed temporarily in a holding pen adjacent to the shared outdoor space where Savannah and Ko had begun their supervised sessions. It was supposed to be routine, temporary, but the gate between the enclosures hadn't latched properly. Not open, just loose enough for sound, scent, and tension to seep through. Ko was the first to notice. As usual, he had wandered toward the edge, his tiny body padding along the fence line, nose twitching curiously. The scent was unfamiliar, sharper, wrong. The new bobcat saw him, still groggy but reactive. She lunged toward the divider, slamming into the chain link with a growl that startled even the nearby staff. Ko froze, unsure, his small frame lowering instinctively. And that's when Savannah moved. She didn't leap. There was no need. But she rose fast, every hair on her back lifting with a low, guttural sound that none of the staff had heard from her in weeks. She stepped directly between Ko and the threat. Her body stiffened, tail lashing, ears pinned. She faced the divider fully, placing herself in front of him like a living wall. KO pressed against her back leg. She didn't look at him. She never took her eyes off the bobcat beyond the barrier. She didn't snarl. She didn't pace. She simply stood her ground and made it clear without words or motion. You won't touch him. The moment passed quickly. Staff secured the faulty gate and moved the new arrival to another wing. But the echo of Savannah's stance lingered. Later, when Kyo lay curled beside her flank, breathing slow and even, a volunteer whispered. She wasn't reacting. She was protecting. They'd all seen it. Savannah hadn't defended herself when she was caught in that trap, hadn't fought back when pain closed around her. But she had stepped forward for him. From that day on, everything deepened. KO's play became bolder. He chased shadows, tackled feathers, leapt across logs, but always returned to her side. He began to vocalize softly, murmuring sounds meant only for her. Savannah started to groom him. First it was cautious, just a rough lick between his ears, one pass of her tongue, as if testing an instinct she hadn't used in years. But soon it became part of them. Every nap, every rest, every pause in the day ended with him curled beneath her jaw and her tongue smoothing down the ridge of his back. They no longer looked like two rescued animals in recovery. They looked like a bond, real, rooted, unspoken, a broken wild heart, and a motherless cub choosing each other when neither had anything left to give. Snow fell that week, soft and slow, dusting the edges of the outdoor enclosure in white. The temperature dropped, but neither Savannah nor Kyo seemed to notice. They had found something warmer than the cold could touch. Each morning now began the same way. Kyo woke first, stretching, blinking through the frost-kissed air. He would turn to find her, always close, always facing him. He would climb onto her paws and rest his head under her chin, and she would stay completely still, letting him settle. Staff began extending their shared sessions. And minutes became 20, then an hour, then longer, until there were entire afternoons when Savannah and KO were together, supervised, monitored, but free to exist in each other's space, without barriers. It didn't matter what they did, whether they played, napped, or simply sat still. It was how they did. KO moved through the world differently when Savannah was near. He walked with purpose, with a quiet confidence that had never been there before. When he startled, he ran toward her, not away. When he grew tired, he didn't seek shelter. He sought her. And Savannah, once a ghost in her own body, had become grounded again. She groomed herself now, ate regularly, engaged with staff without panic. The permanent limp in her front leg no longer seemed like a wound. It was just part of her. Something healed, something overcome. The connection between them didn't need interpretation. It was visible in every breath, every shared blink. One afternoon, while KO was asleep in the curve of her body, a technician entered the enclosure quietly to adjust a heating panel. The noise was soft, but KO stirred. His head jerked up. Savannah stood immediately, not aggressive, just alert, body blocking his view of the door. Her shoulders shifted, ears angled back, eyes locked on the figure near the wall. The tech paused, then backed out slowly, hands raised. Outside, they whispered, she's his. In the evening, Savannah began to play. Not like Kyo, there was no tumbling or chasing, but she would lie on her side, swatting lightly at a piece of pine bark, pushing it toward him. Shared moment, an invitation. Kyo always responded, always eager, always watching her with that wide-eyed awe that only the very young carry. He had filled the emptiness inside her, not with noise or need, but with meaning, and she had become his world. Two wild creatures, from different continents, different species, different wounds, but pain recognizes pain, and love, when it arrives quietly without demand or explanation, can root itself in the deepest places, even in the cold, even in cages, even where no one expects it to grow. Together, they weren't healing. They had already begun to heal. It was supposed to be a routine inspection. Officials from the state Wildlife Board arrived unannounced, clipboards in hand, their eyes sharp, and voices polite but distant. Standard protocol, facility review, documentation check, animal condition reports. The staff wasn't worried until the questions started. Why are a bobcat and a leopard cub being housed together? Is there a written behavioral assessment permitting this interaction? Are you aware this could be seen as a violation of cross-species containment regulations? The room went quiet. The staff tried to explain that Ko had no mother, that no sanctuary had agreed to take him, that Savannah's recovery had only begun when he arrived, that this was more than medical. It was emotional. It was necessary. But the officials didn't deal in feelings. They dealt in rules. Kyo's presence in the state was already a gray area. He was a non-native species, smuggled in illegally, now held temporarily under emergency clause exemptions. His placement with a native predator, even under supervision, raised red flags. We'll have to review this, one of them said. You may need to separate them until a determination is made. The team nodded politely. Their hands were tied. That night, Savannah and Kyo were returned to separate enclosures. Ko didn't understand. He cried. Short, sharp sounds, not from pain, but confusion. He ran to the divider, pressing his paws against the seam, searching for her. When he couldn't reach her, he lay down beside the gate, eyes wide, body tense. Savannah didn't eat. She paced, not violently, not the way she had when first brought in. This was quieter, more haunted. She would stop, stare at the empty gate, then circle again. The staff watched helplessly. For weeks, they had seen life grow between these two animals. Real, unmistakable. And now, pulled apart by lines on paper, that light had begun to flicker. They filed an appeal, reached out to every contact. They had conservation groups, rescue alliances, even corporate partners. One of those calls reached a wildlife advocacy program funded in part by Patagonia, a longtime supporter of rehabilitation projects in the Southwest. The response was swift. Funding was secured to expedite Kaio's relocation to a licensed big cat sanctuary in Colorado, one that specialized in exotic species rescued from the black market. He would have space, care, and safety, but he wouldn't have Savannah. The news came heavy. Staff walked slower that day. Volunteers sat longer at the windows. The night Before his transfer, Kyo was placed beside Savannah's enclosure one last time. No barriers. No staff in the room. Just them. He ran to her. She lowered her head immediately, and he pressed himself into her chest, burying his face in her fur. She curled around him, tongue running gently over the top of his head, then down his spine. They stayed like that for an hour. No noise, no movement, just the quiet sound of one wild heartbeat against another. Morning would come soon, and with it the goodbye. The transport crate sat quietly on the concrete floor, lined with soft towels and warmed by portable pads. Kyo didn't understand what it meant. He was curious, of course. He sniffed the corners, paced in a slow circle. But there was no fear in him. Not yet. He looked up at the volunteers with the same trusting eyes he always had, expecting Savannah to appear behind them at any moment. She wasn't there. Not yet. The team had debated letting them see each other again before departure. Some argued it would only make the separation harder. Others knew it didn't matter. Hard or not, it was necessary. Savannah had not moved from the gate since dawn. She had sensed the shift in the rhythm of the day, the sounds, the tone in people's voices. She paced the fence line, not frantic, but focused, searching for him. When they opened the gate and brought Kyoto to her one last time, she didn't rush forward. She stood still, waited. He saw her and immediately ran into the space between them, chirping softly, brushing his side against her leg, then nuzzling into the soft fur of her chest. Savannah lowered herself slowly, wrapping her body around him in a half circle. Her chin rested across his back, her eyes closed. No one spoke. The room was silent except for their breathing. 5 minutes. 10:15. The vet stepped forward first, whispering Kyo's name like an apology. The cub looked up, blinked, then turned back to Savannah as if asking for permission. She didn't move. She didn't fight, but she held him tighter just for a moment. Longer, then released. Kyo was lifted gently into the crate. He didn't cry. He simply stared at her through the slats, wide-eyed and still. Savannah stepped forward, pressing her nose to the edge of the crate. A pause, one breath. Then he was gone. The van pulled away in silence, tires crunching over frost-covered gravel.